Hi, everyone. With me today is Molson Hart. Molson is a founder of a few companies, including Viahart, which is an educational toy company. Hi, Molson.
Hey, Luca. It's nice
Uh,
to see you.
Great to have you. Do you want to give a couple of words about you and your company to our listeners?
Yeah, sure. So I have two companies. As Luca said, I founded one 13-ish years ago. We are an e-commerce focused manufacturer and distributor of educational children's toys. And then I also founded a company called Edison Trademark Enforcement. And it basically just helps brands enforce their trademarks, protect their patents and copyrights and other intellectual property.
Thank you. Just to give an idea of what consists the operations, for example, for Viahart.
Sure. Yeah. So Viahart has 10 employees. We purchase from manufacturers predominantly in Asia. We operate our own warehouse in the United States, in Texas, which has three full time people, along with myself and actually my wife. And then we have five employees who are outside the United States in a bunch of different countries who work remotely.
Thank you. And what is for you, for example, operational excellence in the context of your company?
What is operational excellence? I would probably start with the cultural principles that we as a company have. As a manager, and I think I could be a better one, I found over the years that you really need maybe the business equivalent of 10 commandments for the whole team to understand what the company is supposed to do, who the company is in a sense, and how they're meant to behave and operate. So operational excellence for me basically means like doing the things that are consistent with those. Forget exactly. I think they're like 9 or 10 commandments, and I'm gonna forget some of them. But so our number one is like safety first. And for each of these commandments, we give a concrete example of what it means in the business. So recently, for safety first, our forklift hit one of the metal beams that supports the pallets that are high up in our warehouse. And you have thousands of pounds that are high up, and the metal beam got a little bent. It wasn't too bent, but it was bent enough for us to at least Google and figure out whether or not it was safe. And basically, the company spent $4,000 to replace that metal beam, even though, yeah,
Yeah.
maybe it would have been fine. And the point there is not only to this, not only to ensure the safety of the people who work in that warehouse, but also to broadcast to the entire company that we're going to put safety before profit and spending money. And that hope I'd like to think that has spillover effects into the rest of our business. Like we make educational toys, right? And so that means choking hazards or unsafe materials going into toys. Like we don't allow that. It doesn't matter if we're going to lose money. Like we're not going to let that happen. And I can always point to that example. Hey, look, we spent a bunch of money on a potentially unnecessary replacement of a metal beam, so employees on, we're serious about it. It's not just words. It's we put our money where our mouth is. And we got a whole bunch of commandments or cultural principles. We don't call them commandments that we follow. And I guess that's operational excellence for us.
Thank you. I love how you said like that you're using the incident as a concrete example. You're showing both the costs and the fact that you changed it, even if it wasn't like fully clear that it had to be changed, like just to put the commitment so that people can see that you're serious is not just words, but you can't. That's something that you cannot fake, like spending and making sure that people are really safe.
Yeah, it had a profound effect on the people who are working in the warehouse. I don't know how powerful of an example it was for the remote team. Because if you're not in the warehouse, like I could say, look, here's the bill we paid. And maybe I could say, here's the before and the after, but it's not as powerful as saying, oh, wow, these guys are actually coming in and they're taking down that. The metal beams are huge. It's
Yeah.
not just like a little metal beam where you pop it in and out. Like they're 22 feet, which is probably about 7 meters tall. And I don't know, they're like probably, I don't know, like 2 meters wide. And it's a big operation. We spent a lot of money. Yeah.
Yeah. On this, for example, what would be the equivalent, or what's a concrete example of safety first for one of the people who works remote?
That works remotely.
Yeah.
So it totally depends on the department. So in the case of production, if
Mm.
we do an inspection on a product and let's say you have a nose on a stuffed animal that's like a little bit wobbly or something like that. And we catch that in the inspection, and I don't know, 3 out of 100 pieces or something like that have this issue. Safety first means not saying, it's still attached, it's probably fine. Oh, let's pull a couple of them to make sure they stay attached so that the nose doesn't get lodged in a kid's windpipe, air pipe, whatever it's called. Safety first means that we're delaying the production of the container to do a large sample size inspection of thousands of units, and we're going to use like a tension meter clamp on thousands of them. And our factory overseas, depending on where they're located and who they are going to complain and say that we're being ridiculous,
Yeah.
and we're going to spend a lot of money, but we have peace, but we're conforming to that principle. And I could explain in the long run, safety first actually makes you money, in my opinion, but it's also really good for like your heart, your peace of mind. You don't want a kid to choke on a toy you sold. That's horrible.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I also really believe that it pays in the long run, because I've seen so many people who did it, and at the end, like, their business looks very good and they're making profit. And I've saw a lot of people who didn't do it, and somehow it's all connected. If you have a business that cannot do safety, they probably also cannot do like a lot of other things. They're not attentive to a lot of things. Mm. Um,
Yeah, the question is whether or not it's causal, right? Is it because
What I've
yeah, we
noticed,
don't know. It
what,
could just be correlated.
huh? Yeah,
Like I bet
uh, I still think that it's quite, just even I'm just thinking about the 4,000 euros for the beam, and because we're always like considering the cost of safety looking at the past. And maybe if in the past the biggest cost you had was 1,000 euros, then you think that the cost of safety is 1,000 euros. Now you know that it's 4,000 euros, but maybe you avoided something else that in a parallel universe would make you think that the cost of safety is 20,000 euros, dollars. Uh,
yeah, what 4,000 euros? It's really cheap compared to the
yes.
cost of a pallet falling on a human being.
Yeah.
That from 20, what would it be? Stop doing meters conversions from 30 feet up, from 10 meters up, 9 meters. I don't know.
How did you come up with the 10 principles? Is it something like you've been adding them over time, or is it like one day you stopped and thought, what are the principles? What should be the principles?
I wish I were smart enough to have been like, we need cultural principles. That's what the organization is missing in a eureka moment. No, there's a book called Traction. It's also like EOS, Gino Wickman. And one of the things he tells you to do is to like, I forget what he calls it, but make 10 principles, whatever you want to call them. And so that's where I got that idea from. And then to your question, we modified them slightly, changed them over time. And we also, I added one recently, keep it simple, stupid. And I've seen you talk a lot about this, like in your book. One of the most powerful examples is about like in the DuPont factory, the guy moving his family into the place where they make the gunpowder. But the cultural principles, I would say, were pretty useless until I gave them concrete examples. People like didn't know what they meant. And then even if they knew what they meant, I'm not sure they believed that they were real until no, like we blew a bunch of money on this safety thing, and I could give you a concrete example for all the principles. Yeah, they believe them now. So one guy even told me, he was like, "Yeah, I thought the safety first thing was bullshit." And then I saw you pay. all the money for the slightly bent beam. And no, it's real. He was training a new person, actually. It was actually one of my happier moments as a manager. He was training someone new, and the new guy was like, and I think I came in and I was like, no, the cultural principles, they're real. And then he was like, oh yeah, I thought they were bullshit, but no, they just spent 4,000, blah, blah, blah. And that was a happy moment for me because I knew the concrete examples and the principles were working.
Cool. What was your proudest moment as a manager?
Being a manager for me has been a lot of pain and suffering. It didn't come naturally to me, and I'm not sure it ever will. Sometime, like, I don't know, but I can tell you last week, someone did something so good that I literally went and I found the first email that they sent us like 4 years ago when they were applying for the job, and I, like, opened their resume, and I was like, "Okay, let me look at this resume. What did they do in this resume? Because I wanna find more people like this," and maybe this is small sample size or nonsense, but it was interesting. At the bottom of the resume, they had listed out their references. And they were like, you can call these people. This is, and it said who it was. Like, this was my direct supervisor. This was my direct. It wasn't like this is my buddy or my friend or my uncle or my brother. And that was interesting to me because I was like, okay, so that's a green flag, right? That's something I should be looking for on resumes. But what made me really, I don't know about proud, but I told them, I was like, "Hey, I thought this work was so good, and here's how I verified it was good." And then I thought it was so good that I did this thing, and I told them that I looked at the email from 4 years ago, and she was touched. I felt that she seemed to really appreciate it, and that made me feel really good because I want my people to be happy, and I want good work, and I want them to earn money, but it just made me feel really good.
Yeah, that's great. That's something that I've heard from quite a few people that they really felt like this connection and this happiness and proudness when someone does something good and they tell it. And then sometimes there are a lot of times that people do it and they don't know. Like I'm talking with the manager and the manager tells me like, oh yeah, this person has been really good. And I'm like, have you told them? A lot of times I'm like, not really. And it's just a lot of happiness left on the table. Yeah. Really glad that you did it.
I think it depends on your personality as a manager. I'd love to hear about that from you in a second. But to build on that point, so I'm a pretty emotional person, both pluses and minuses, right? I'll get too happy, I'll get too sad, I'll get too angry. But other managers will keep it more inside and they won't let those emotions flow as freely. But the other thing that's really interesting, I think, about personalities is that some people want public praise and some people want private praise. And that to me is fascinating because I'm like a public praise person, but there are people who want private praise. And I think that I've praised that particular person publicly before and it didn't get the same positive response. Maybe it was me like giving a concrete example showing how impressed I was with it going back on the resume. But yeah, I don't know. It's just fascinating. But yeah, uh, that's interesting, right? Because you have managers who talk a lot, who do tell their employees all the time, and then you have managers that don't, and both of them probably can be effective. What have you seen?
So for me, like the thing about private and public, it it really depends the employee. And a lot of time people are like ask me like, how do you understand which person prefers what? And I'm like, I don't know. You just see the reactions, and hopefully you're telling them enough times that you can see, and then for the next time. For me, it's if a manager only does it publicly, does only public recognition. For me, it means that usually they're not doing it enough. By which I mean that, like, of course, there should be like when someone does something really good, maybe really
Right.
steps up, has a wonderful idea, I don't know, all these kind of things. Then, yeah, there should be the public praise and everything. But so many times, like people do the small things, or even just that maybe they just meet expectations, but that, for example, one day they managed to handle a very difficult client, or maybe there was a last order coming very late at night and it went, like all those things. And a lot of people, they really want to know, not necessarily be praised, but just be acknowledged. Just be acknowledged that it was a hard situation and they did it. And uh,
Yeah,
so,
totally. Because dealing with a hard client takes a lot of energy. And then if you're the person who's dealing with that, you're like, man, I expended a lot of energy. The manager didn't have the energy for the 5 to 10 seconds it takes to either say thank you for doing that or
uh,
in some cases, well done. But yeah, I think I really get your point. Not every accomplishment, some things can just be good, but not merit a team wide meeting, which like everyone claps for
yeah,
that innovation. Yeah.
yeah.
So I
And
get what you're
then,
saying, I think.
yeah, and then this is something that happened to me recently. I was doing some work for a company and I was like interviewing employees, finding some
Mhm.
problem. And there was one employee that had a really hard and complex job, working so many hours, facing so many difficulties and responsibilities, taking decisions. And then I asked him, what is one thing that you wish your manager knew or did? And I was expecting that the answer would be something like put the workload more correctly, give me more support, give me a raise, something like that. His answer was, I will just want to know that he knows how hard is my job.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the only thing he said.
Yeah. You hear that all the time, particularly from people who have a lot of management experience. It's not just about the money. It could just be about like acknowledgement and stuff like that. It's
And on this note, what do you think that like maybe our listeners don't know you or don't know your job? What are some difficulties or complexities of your job that you think that most people don't know about?
like most people who like run businesses or most people who just are employees and maybe
Yeah,
run
people
by
who maybe
educational
don't run
employees or something.
businesses and maybe they think that running a business is easier than it is. And what do you think that they might be underestimating?
Everyone's different, but for me, the hardest part of business by far is people, and not even just your customers or even your clients. I find it pretty easy actually to work with the clients because a lot of times it's pretty easy to come up with a framework for what they want. Let's make them more money. Everyone's different, but in general, if you like help them make more money, they're not going to be too unhappy with you. Okay, big companies are different from medium-sized companies, which are different from small-sized companies. And if you're talking to the first line employee versus the manager versus the owner, there are different incentives there. And so you need to deal with them differently or work with them differently. But I feel like I got a pretty good handle on that. What's hard is keeping people motivated and paying them fairly when you have inflation and when rents are going down, rents are going up, and housing prices are going up. You, and in our case, trying to figure that out across different countries with exchange rates and stuff like that. But I probably have to simulate. This makes me sound like I'm some sort of autistic freak or whatever. Not like a one that's like very talented, but just this is weird. But I have to simulate every employee I work with like in my head, right? I need they might be doing the same thing for me as their boss, but I have to do it like 10 times over. I have to what is motivating this person? And depending on their age, or depending on their sex, where they are in their lives, who they are, it could be totally different things. And it's constantly changing according to where they are in their life. And it's like essential that you understand these things. Otherwise, you'll be a bad manager. And then also, like the nature of, I think, of being human is like a spreadsheet can only make you so happy or so mad. Like it's a spreadsheet. And the range of behaviors that you're going to get out of a spreadsheet are pretty narrow. But human beings are wildly unpredictable, complex things. And you want to do right by the good people you have in your company. And it's just really hard. So, yeah, that maybe, so it's hard to be a manager.
It is. And one thing like I've noticed is that so many people who are managers, they don't like it. They're doing it because they have a company to run, or because it became their job, or because they care about something. But it's hard, and it's a lot of things to figure out and responsibilities.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Some people definitely like it more than others. There's definitely that. But I've spoken to a pretty wide range of people. And when you speak to the people who are a little bit older, who've been doing it for longer, you tend to hear this like over and over again. It's all about the people. And that's the most important thing. And that's where all the struggle comes from. And that's where all the success comes from too, because you can't do everything yourself. So it's important. And uh, I don't know. I don't think I've ever met anyone who just like lives for it because it's a psychological burden to think about other people and you have to do it right in order to get good results.
It is. Do you have any role model as manager, or someone who sometimes you think, what would he or she do, or that you learn?
Yeah, I think so. I think what I try to do is I'm like constantly I'll take a little thing from everybody. And then my thinking on it is I want to be a good manager, but I have to be a manager that aligns with my personality. And so there are certain things about my personality that are weird, maybe. I'm very impatient and I like love to make things move fast. Let's fucking go. And so you can't be let's fucking go all the time, even though that may be my personality. And so you need to modify that in a way that works for other people. But then another thing that I do is I try to find managers who I think have been effective, who also have this personality trait, because I'd be miserable if I'm not eh, making changes happen fast regularly. So what I could try to do is find someone else who seems to be like that, who seems to be effective and be like, all right, what is this person doing? And I don't want to do long meetings all the time. I don't want to talk to people all the time. And so, okay, can I find someone else who isn't that people oriented, but seems to be effective and seems to be appreciated by their staff? What are they doing? And
Yeah.
so it's just if I hear people say do weird things, oh, can I integrate that? Does that work? And then if it works, I keep it. If it doesn't, throw it out. Or if I don't like doing it, then I'll try to figure out a way to avoid it somehow while still trying to be effective.
Yeah. On this, you published a tweet which I really liked a few weeks ago. It said, do not just hire for the jobs that you're doing that you don't want to do, hire for the jobs that you are not doing that you need to do. I really like that because so many times, like, people, they have these blind spots on of jobs that they know that they need to do, but they're not doing, and it's not even on their to-do list. Do you have any example for you of what's a job that you need to do, or for a long time you needed to do and now you're doing?
I have one that I'm not doing that I'm trying to hire for. So our business shifted from a direct to consumer e-commerce business to one that has an increasing share of wholesale business. And so that means that we're selling to more brick and mortar retail stores like shops and relatively less to the people who buy online. And when we did that, it changed the seasonality or the calendar of when people make purchases. So when you sell toys, like our best-selling educational toy, Brain Flakes, which is behind me. Um,
Do you want to actually get one piece and show it a bit closer?
oh
Because
yeah, sure, I have to.
I don't think that people can. Oh,
Yeah, I love doing this. This is great. So these are two Brain Flakes discs. Oh, I got a little nice. This is cool. And they interconnect like this. They should make a popping sound, clicking sound when they come together. And this is just two, but you can put a bunch of them together and make that dragon, pirate ship, and all that stuff. And so they're fun. But like the sales for this when you're selling directly to people like peak around December 17th because it's a less expensive item. And so people tend to buy it very close to Christmas. That's like the biggest sales day of the year. But if you're selling to a brick and mortar store, The sales may even peak in like August and September because they need to have that stock in advance of the holiday selling season. And they need to get it prepared. It needs to go to this warehouse and distribute it out to these stores. So the timing's different. When the timing is different, we need to have inventory at different times. And so what that means is someone needs to get in there and go through all the data and product by product and figure out how the calendar of purchasing is changing so that our forecast can be accurate. So we don't run out of stock, so we don't buy too much stock. And this is just something that I haven't done for months and months, even though it's become obvious that it's important to our business. And so even though I'm not, so because I'm not doing it, it can be easy for me to think, oh, whatever, I don't need to hire for it because it's not giving me pain in any way. It's not, I can't say on my calendar, I spent 2 hours modifying this calendar or whatever, modifying the timing of when our sales are, but it's something that needs to be done for the business. And so I guess to your point, something that I found like somewhat effective is if you're keeping like lots of to-do lists of what you need to do in the short, medium, and long term, you can go through that long term and medium term to-do list and you can build a job description and combine it with things that you are doing that maybe you don't like or things that you aren't good at. And then you can create a job out of it. And because one of the weird things I learned as a manager is that there are lots of things that I don't like to do that other people like to do. And so you can make yourself and someone else happy by creating a new job for those things.
Yes. What are the learnings that you made as a manager, for example, that some things maybe that where you changed your point of view from when you started a long time ago?
Man, that was so bad. So one thing sounds really basic, but people are not me. Like I had to learn that other people were different. And going back to what I was saying, right? There are lots of things I don't like to do that other people actually like to do. And that took me some time to understand. I could tell you about something I learned from parenting, or maybe an idea in management that was cemented by parenting, is that it's a lot easier to change the job than it is to change the person for the job. Like people are to some extent who they are. And if someone's good, if someone's smart, and they're not doing a great job in their position, if you can, move them around to something that suits them better and they'll be happier and you'll be happier. And the reason why I said that from parenting is that like my son, even though he's 2, he has his own distinct personality and it doesn't seem to be very affected by his education. He just is who he is. He's a funny kid. Yeah. So those are some things and there are many more like it. I was really stupid at management and people.
And if there's something, for example, that your people can do to work better with you for you that could make your life easier, or
The first thing that comes to my mind is telling me what they're thinking because it goes back to what I was saying earlier, right? About how I'm trying to run a simulation of what's important to everyone. But it's not always possible to know that the woman on your team is trying to get pregnant or is pregnant. And that matters a lot to them. It's a huge life event, and they might be
yes.
concerned about the details of our maternity policy, and that could be dragging down their effectiveness one way or another. And just if I know what's important to you, then we can then if I have that information, we can find the overlap. If you imagine a Venn diagram of what's important to the company, what's important to me, what's important to you, and we can work something out. But if this information is hidden to me, then it's hard to do that. Just open, free communication helps a lot. I think in both directions to find that win-win because I don't think people talk about that so much in the employee employer relationship, maybe better than I would. People usually talk about like vendor customer relationship, like win-win type thing. But like both sides need a win. If one side isn't winning, then the relationship shouldn't last or probably won't.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, I see this a lot of times. This starts maybe because someone also had a bad experience once they shared some problem or some need, and then they got either a wall from the other side or negative response, and then now I'm like, okay, now I'm not gonna share anymore. It's not a conscious choice, and it's a bit of a shame because there would be a lot of those win-wins, as you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, that makes total sense. I'd like to think we're the type of company where if you get pregnant, you're not getting fired. Not every company is like that. Pregnancy is maybe a bad example because most countries have laws protecting that type of thing, or at least I think they do. But yeah, not some people, some companies don't respond, or some companies can use that information against the employee in various ways. And so that can leave a pretty negative taste in someone's mouth. And as you said, deter them from raising it from with a good company that will respond positively to that change.
Yeah. And since you mentioned these win-win things, like I also hear like a lot of times in companies there are win-wins that have to do maybe not with the personal life of the employee, but like the role and what the company needs. And maybe there is an overlap between what they could do or maybe the idea that they have. And then again, somehow it doesn't get shared. Maybe because in the past someone gave an idea and it was dismissed in a bad way, or maybe even at
Yeah.
school. Like sometimes maybe someone shared an idea at school and then for the next 20 years they have the idea of, I shouldn't share things. It's not worth the effort.
Yeah, absolutely. You, if someone is doing poorly, the manager needs to tell them. And that, at least in my mind, that's the beginning of the conversation about either how to fix to identify the root cause and then to fix it. And then also it could be a conversation about shifting responsibilities towards something that will enable the person to do well.
Yeah.
So gotta have that. And I think it's mostly the manager's job to tease that information out of people. But it'd be nice if someone was just like, this is what's important to me right now. Okay, let's do something that makes you happy then.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there any problem that, according to you, the world underestimates? Like people underestimate?
Yeah. So it's what is it? It's October 15th. I think people underestimate the chance of world war to be contemporaneous of like current events. Yeah, I think that people underestimate that. But there's so many other things that people underestimate. We could make a long list. It's like human nature.
The problem that people overestimate?
I think people overestimate how happy money will make you. And that might even be like a global problem because it seems like a lot of the problems we have in this world are like greed driven. So maybe if people understood that whatever they were doing that's not so good to get that money, it really won't make them necessarily that much happier in the end.
Yeah, I agree. Especially like there are a lot of people which, I mean, there are some people for which definitely they do have money problems and that would improve their life. But there are also people who don't have money problems, even though they say that they have money problems. I can think of a lot of my friends, and they have a lifestyle problem. They don't have a money problem. Everyone says the five friends you're in determines you're the average of the five people you spend the most time with. What I'm noticing is
Mhm.
that you spend what the average of the five people you spend the most time with in terms of money. And if as you keep like getting more money, you maybe advancing your career or what else, you change the people that you keep spending time. Maybe you move to a nicer neighborhood, you go to nicer events. Yeah, then your needs increase faster
Yeah,
than your
yeah, I
money.
think you're spot on. I think that I actually think you're more right about what you said with the spending than what you said about the average of the 5 people the 5 people I spend the most time with right now are my 2 kids, my wife, and then my parents-in-law. And I don't know, I don't feel like I'm becoming like them. I'm not becoming more like a 2-year-old or more my Taiwanese mother-in-law. But
Yeah.
but the spending, it feels consistent with that for sure. So it's a really interesting point.
Yeah.
And the thing is, if you achieve operational excellence, this will be one of the things you focus on, because if you achieve operational excellence, the money just comes.
And
So then you
and
end up with, yeah.
yeah, and on this, by the way, something I've noticed is that a lot of people, a lot of companies, maybe they have some operational problems and they fix them by focusing. And then what I've seen a lot of times is that then they start focusing too much about new things, which is not bad per se, but it's bad if they stop doing the things that fix their problems in the first place, and then those problems come back. Yeah.
Business is like a funny thing. In my experience, there are times where you need to be like, I'm gonna use the F word, why not? Fuck operational excellence. I just need to do this new thing. And then there are other times where you're like, whoa, we've been ignoring the operational excellence and focusing on the new thing for a little bit too long. So now we need to bring it back. And so, like, maybe there's some sort of cycle there. And the funny thing is, if the new thing fails, in some ways, it's easier to work on operational excellence because you're just back to where you are and you just need to, like, okay, that solves a lot of problems because they're like, okay, we're going to stop being distracted by this thing and we're going to go pay back the debt of having focused on this new spicy, sexy thing or whatever. But then the flip side is, if the new thing works, that just throws a wrench into all your systems. And you're like, okay, this is great. We have sales. This is innovative and fun. But like, how do we scale this up? And then how do we adapt it? And then how do we feed both of these things, whether it's the new thing and the old business? And so it's harder to achieve operational excellence when that happens. But also I think, in my opinion, maybe humble, maybe not, it's unrealistic to maintain operational excellence when you're going through a transformation. It's just like, how are you gonna do it? It's not possible.
Yeah, I think it's as you said, like this alternation. I think it's very important to have some moments every now and then where you make sure that you go back to the principles, not necessarily go back to the form of the principle, like the procedure to the letter, but you make sure that the the substance of the principle is somehow respected. It may be in a different way that you would do it in calmer times, but that you still remind people that it exists and it matters for a reason.
Yeah, it's really difficult. So we talked about safety first, right? So
Yeah.
safety first, that's not really a principle you can ever violate, even if you have some new cool business you want to start. But we do have pride in our work as another principle.
Mm.
And that's a very interesting, like, operational management thinking question, because if you're starting something new, the first version of it is probably gonna suck. But you have to sometimes bring that first version to market. And so, like, how do you suspend that principle while maintaining it for the other business? It's tricky. And something else I was thinking of, I don't know if you can talk about it, but what do you think is, like, happening with these European car companies? Because, like, you have, like, Chinese electric vehicles coming in, and they all kinda wanna make this transformation towards electric vehicles, and, like, how are they maintaining the level of operational excellence in this weird time?
So I don't think that this shift is so much like affecting operational excellence, meaning
Mhm.
that if you had operational excellence before, the shift is just about what you're producing. Maybe you have new machines to install, new people to train, but if you were doing it before, it's not so much of a change. What worries me the most, and I'm saying it particularly as someone who lives in a town in which in the past 1 out of 3 employees were working for the automotive sector and it's decreasing day by day, and the population of my town is shrinking. It's how blindfolded people were to this transition. I studied, for example, automotive engineering, and many of my colleagues, they graduate, my university was doing masters in the diesel engine. I have a few friends of mine that I went to university with. They graduated 5 years in diesel engines. They came out 2 years later, stopped producing diesel engines. There is clearly some big mismatch between the funnel of competencies and people getting hired and what people talk about and the changes of the market. And that's what's worrying me the most. I just make another example for how this is terrible in Europe. Talking for Italy, but I hear that a lot of other countries have the same problem. Every day on the newspaper, you read the one of two news. One, we don't have enough doctors in our hospitals. Two, there's been the entrance exams at the University for Medicine, and there are still a low limit on the number of people that can be admitted. And I'm like, those two things are not compatible. If there is a shortage of doctor, you need to remove the number of people that can study medicine. And they're not doing it, and that's just like, for me, a huge problem.
I think we solved that problem in the US by getting rid of the examination for doctors. So now it's a lot easier to become a doctor. That's half a joke. Well, what do you think is going to happen?
I think that at some point there will be a shock, but because we're not seeing it, it will be harder than we think. And also, people are not considering all the demographic changes. Like not having enough doctor is less of a problem when you have a younger population and you don't have a pandemic, and it's much worse when the population is aging. Yeah,
That's a wonderful example, wonderful answer to the question you asked me before. What's a problem that people are underestimating?
yeah,
The long-term effects of demographic changes, definitely up there. The other thing I was thinking is what's crazy to me is like sometimes you can have a shock and then it seems like you don't even have change. Like
yes,
you go back 2 or 3 years ago in Italy, like the hospitals got overwhelmed, but there's a shock, but it sounds like it wasn't sufficient one way or another to cause change. And I'm not making any kind of prediction or anything like that, but like you start to begin to understand how you could like have a dark ages in any country of the world. I was hearing about how there was like a technological dark age in China where they like forgot how to like make clocks and make paper and make gunpowder. And there's like a famous dark ages in Europe. I don't know exactly when where the history is, but it's like interesting that like sometimes there's a shock and then people don't change. And I know there's a famous example of that in 2020, right? It's wild, right? Like, what's going on there?
yeah, yeah. And this inertia and the fact that people don't even notice, you know, that's worrying.
I think some people don't notice it, but I think like the vast majority of them notice, but feel powerless to change it. I bet that's how you feel. That's how I feel. Like we can have this conversation. We both acknowledge that like long-term demographic issues are like a major problem. But okay, then what?
Yeah,
You wanna run for president and or be the head of Italy, Giorgia Meloni or whatever? How do you solve this problem? It takes such a massive amount of human coordination, and then sometimes it seems like the people who are in power don't even have sufficient power to enact changes. So it's very fascinating. Like, how do you change these potentially catastrophic issues that, at least to my mind, a lot of people think are coming? It is sad because oftentimes we're raised with a concept that things are going to be stable or up and to the right. And the reality is that's not always the case. And a lot of people, depending on where you're born, in order to get that state, not necessarily get stable, but in order to get that like better life, you got to move around a little bit. And it sounds, hey, sorry, buddy, that master's in diesel engineering. Yeah, it's still tremendously valuable and I appreciate it, but like you're going to have to adapt a little bit, maybe become a doctor.
yeah, yeah. And I make an example like this house where I'm renting. And the reason why I'm renting is because the rents in my town have been going down since at least a decade. And and for example, this like people always say the value of houses always goes up, but it really depends one on the demographics and two, it depends at which price you bought the house. And the same thing applies to the quality of lives. It's true that because of technology and a lot of other shifts, quality of life goes up. But one question is, at what price do we have the current quality of life? Because, for example, if the price for the quality of life that we have now is also that we are putting a lot of debt in the future, that we are forgetting some of the maintenance which creates the future, then maybe we will also have the same phenomenon. Thankfully, I'm very bullish on technology that will solve a lot of problems. But yeah,
There's this really cool graph in I think Zero to One by Peter Thiel. And I think it's like optimistic, pessimistic, definite, indefinite. And I think he says he calls the United States, I don't know about Italy, an indefinite optimistic country. So something that is the case in the US right now is that we're optimistic about the future because things have always been great in the US, but there's no concrete path to get there. There's no one, to your point, like, planning on how we continue the greatness. If anything, there's just lots of problems and they keep on building up, they keep stacking up, and there's no solution to solve anything. But nonetheless, we remain optimistic. And it's strange to me. I can't, as someone maybe who's a business person, you can't be indefinite optimistic in business. It doesn't work. You you have to be definite. If you want to make money, you probably need to be definite and optimistic.
One other thing that I wanted to ask is, so first of all, I've seen all the bread flakes at your back. I wanted to ask out of curiosity, what's the most curious thing that maybe people built with it? I'm sure that you get some pictures or
Like the unexpected things
yes,
people
the
build out of brain
unexpected.
flakes. I was walking to the warehouse the other day, and one of our team members built the cell phone holder, so he could put his cell phone, like, it was convenient for speakerphone calls and something like that, and that was pretty cool. Art projects, I've seen some people do some really cool, like, rainbow things. The thing that about brain flakes is really, I guess, weird, and then also really important is that, like, brain flakes cannot be Lego for 2 reasons. 1, brain flakes is not yet Lego. It just the way it works is completely different, and your ultimate designs are not as concretely identical. Like, you can make some beautiful stuff, like, maybe you can figure out that this is a pirate ship, but if you get up close to it, like, it's a little bit more abstract, it's a little bit more modern, and so one of the really interesting things about how to build a brand, because if we're exactly like Lego, who needs brand flakes? Just buy Lego, it's got the brand, everyone knows it. It's like, how do you differentiate it in a way that's useful to people? And so, actually, what we end up doing a lot of, and this is not something that I expected, is that you can't see it, but we end up making a lot of products that people can actually play with. So you can build a sword and you can build a shield. And unlike Lego, you can carry that shield around and you can use the sword and you can hit somebody with it. And the sword's going to break, but not in a catastrophic way. And the discs are soft and not as pointy, so you won't hurt someone. And so that's the curious thing. So we make crowns that people can wear and shields and swords. And behind me, there's a guitar that is not visible. And you can hold the guitar and do a little air guitar with it. So that's like the curious thing about it. But that's the magic too. Like, you have to really figure that thing out. Like, what can this do that magnetic tiles and Lego building blocks and all the other things that are in between can't? And then focus on that, and then how do you drive education through it? That's the quandary, the thing you really need to figure out.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts about education? And in particular about, for example, is there any class that you think is missing?
From higher education. Yeah, so one of in the US, it's my understanding that our university education is still pretty solid. Like, most of our issues are around the education that leads up to it. I think the 2 changes that first come to my mind, this is oftentimes suggested, but it's a lot more difficult to implement than it is for people to just say. But a lot of people say that you need some sort of, like, financial accounting class in high school. A lot of people, probably the vast majority of Americans, graduate from high school without understanding how a credit card works. That's problematic because everyone gets a credit card, or a lot of people get access to credit cards when they're 18. In a lot of cases, it ends up ruining their lives because they don't understand how it works and they accumulate a massive amount of debt and they don't understand how that needs to be addressed as soon as possible instead of allowing it to compound. The other thing that I would probably do, I think Spanish is great. I'm trying to learn it myself, but I would just cut it and replace it with more math. Yeah, even if you look at, like, the PISA scores, like, the United States does pretty well on reading, it does pretty well on science, You would think that science thing is, like, very math heavy, but when I looked at the actual science questions on PISA, it's, like, pretty verbal. The thing that the United States does not do well on PISA is math. And in my experience, no American can speak Spanish unless it's part of their job or that's where they're from. So just cut it. It's not working. Just replace it with math. It's much more important. And that to me, that seems like actually doable, maybe ish. I don't know. The problem with a law, all these education things is like, it goes back to what you were saying before. First of all, you need to have the teachers for it. They need to exist. And then also we can say things like, "Oh, we need to improve the education. We need to invest in education." But you have to not everyone can agree on what needs to be taught. And in the US, we have a lot of like union resistance. There are all sorts of like crazy incentives that make it really difficult to improve the education, which is so important for both the cohesion of the country and like future earnings like
Yeah.
of the people. If I may. So, one thing that I feel good about is that, like, we are just, like, a little bit, like, angling ourselves in there, bypassing the system. So, if I can like, people are going to our website, and they can build stuff based on the instructions on there, and we try to make money at the same time, but that feels good because, like, we can control it. Like, I can we have, like, math learning. We even have some Spanish learning stuff on there now that I think about it, so I guess I'm a hypocrite, but that
Mhm.
feels good.
That's cool. For me, I was very lucky because some of my teachers, they went above and beyond at high school and they were just teaching some additional things after hours. And like my favorite classes was when my English teacher would bring some alumni that maybe graduated from high school 5, sometimes even almost 10 years before. And he would just come and have them talk about what's life in 5 or 10 years. And for me, that was really useful. You know?
That's awesome. That would be
And
something that we could use a lot more of here. It never happened to me once in high school.
I'm just thinking something also that some companies could do. There are
Yeah.
so many companies where you enter as a graduate job, maybe at a very low level job, and you have no idea of what the paths could be. I remember like it felt when I entered my first job, it felt like, I don't know, my manager has always been a manager and he entered like that. But no, he entered as a graduate 20 years before. What's been the path? No one really tells you. And unless you've been lucky enough that maybe you knew, there are a lot of people who don't know the path and therefore they self-limit the growth. Well, and that's also bad for the company. So if I were like a big company, one thing I would do is that every now and then I would just get like some people from some maybe leadership role, maybe middle management, and just what was your paths?
You're so right. I'll give you a concrete example. I think the pathing comes usually it has to come from family or close friends if it
Yes.
comes at all. And oftentimes there's no if you don't have those close friends and family, then you get no pathing. And these people end up being really frustrated, even if they're ambitious, because they see this like kind of vague target. Oh, I want to earn that money. I want to have that status, but they don't know how to get there. I grew up in a town where the instead of making cars, like in Turin, like our thing was finance. Okay. And so I was surrounded by finance and all my friends' parents, they were mostly in that industry, but my parents weren't. And I went to college and I got a double major in math and economics. And I used some family connections to interview for jobs in finance and math and economics those are good majors if you want to go into finance. And I was interviewing for a job for an investment banker and I didn't know what the job was. Like I did not know what investment bankers do. And you could understand why that would be the case because investment bankers they're basically real estate brokers for selling companies or selling debt and something like that. But investment banker doesn't explain to you what that thing is. And I really could have used someone coming in and being like, here's the path, here's how this works. But there was none of that. And even though I grew up in a town where I was surrounded with it, and even though I had the majors where I was supposed to understand it, I was still clueless.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
One other thing that you might find interesting, I don't know if you know this, you probably do. So you have this great book, 100 Lessons Learned Too Late.
One
Is
of
that
the
right?
truths
Okay.
you will learn too late. Yes.
Oh, okay. I have bad memory for words. All right. It's a great book.
Thank you.
And so I copied you a little bit and I tried to make like lessons on TikTok and they're pretty bad, but that's my attempt at bypassing the schooling system and giving people some sense of paths. And to your point, I think I made like a long 5 part, it's like 48 minutes of like exactly how to buy a house, how to go from zero money to buying a house in a way that I thought was robust. So I was like, yeah, I'm not like, yeah, get a master's in diesel engines. It was like, okay, here's some like tools and things that you can think of to do and that bypass the schooling system. I wouldn't say it's working. We don't have that many views, but I'm proud of it. I enjoy it anyway.
No, this is great. And that's another example. Like buying a house is one of the most important, like consequential decisions people will make, and no one teaches it. And that's just crazy.
It's insane.
Is there any way in which the listeners of this show can help you?
You got some good questions, Luca. All right, so I'll put my PayPal up and you guys can all send me $50 or more if you like. Now, I like constructive criticism because I'm a little bit maybe pathological about wanting to improve. So if you follow me on social media and you tell me that I'm screwing up in some way, like I won't always agree with you and I am still human and I'll be like, if that's true. But I really do love constructive criticism. So if you see me on social media or you see me, I don't know, just hit it. I'm not easily offended, I think, relative to the normal population. I'm always soliciting that from my employees. Like I always, whenever I make a mistake, I'm very careful to say, you were right. I was wrong. Sorry. But I don't know. Maybe you can go follow me on TikTok and you might think that you're helping me by doing that, but maybe there are 1 or 2 videos on there that will help you. My Twitter, I think, is less educational.
I think your Twitter is quite educational, actually. But yeah.
It's more like free flowing, just whatever's on my head, mind stuff. And that's actually one of the main reasons why I love Twitter so much. It's like a constant conversation with people who are telling me I'm an idiot. And it's like highly useful because like people like, oh, I actually am being an idiot here and I can modify my thinking. That's one of the reasons why I like it so much.
Yeah, totally.
Something that I'm really interested in that you would know about is what is like in well-run companies, have you seen managers manage up to 10 people? And have you seen managers manage up to 3 people? And what have you seen? That's my first question. And I have a follow-up question for you as well.
So if we are, I've seen like quite a difference of people managed, like it varies a lot. What matters for me, like, is the bandwidth. Because the thing is that the manager has also a job himself that he needs to do. And some managers, they have more job to do, like just for themselves than others. And for me, like the thing that I've noticed is that you as a manager, you need to have a certain bandwidth to give to your people to do the managing people part. And for me, that's the bottleneck. So if for example, you are very busy and you have a lot of things yourself, maybe you will have less bandwidth to give to your people. And then either you're somehow like so good that you can do it with less bandwidth, or you need to find some to lower the number of people directly behind you, or accept that there will be some. So for me, that's the main. And in very good companies, like I've seen both like managers that are very busy and they have a few reports, or managers which are just managing people and they have a lot of reports. And yeah.
Yeah. Something that I've seen is, and would you say the determinant of that is always just the business, whether or not they have that personal role that they need to fulfill? Or it's also the personality of the manager. Like some people just don't want to manage 10 people, and some people do because they like having that many conversations with 10 different people.
Yes. Yes. I know of a manager which managed a group of 12 people and he was very good at it. He wasn't doing anything else. And one of the reasons why he wasn't doing anything else, if I can be like straightforward, is because he wasn't good at doing anything else. or he had completely no inclination at doing it. But that was fine. Like I don't know if it was like his own manager that recognized the situation, or he put in this himself in this situation, but that worked.
That's cool. Yeah, reminds me of a story I once heard about this guy gets an interview at General Electric. And the guy who's interviewing him is I have a very stringent interview process because I like to hire the best possible people because I don't like to work. I like to play golf. Yeah. The other question for you would be like, true or false? How do you think about creating metrics for people? Does everyone need to have one number? Should everyone have three numbers? Or is it okay to just manage qualitatively? Or how do you think about building metrics for teams and individual people and how hard that can be in a changing business with ERP systems and all that stuff?
So I think that in most cases, unless there is some legal requirement, because for example, you're a hospital and you need to track some metrics, something like that, I think that it's possible to manage everything qualitatively. Like people need
Mhm.
priorities, they need things to fixate on. But for example, it could be, I don't think that you need necessarily to put a number on everything. If you are clear with them and you manage to let them understand what is your criteria for good and bad, or you give them like really frequent feedback. Like the idea is that I need to be able to know whether I'm doing a good job and I need to have something to aim for, but it doesn't have necessarily to be a number for me.
Something you said about really frequent feedback. Do the best managers have systems for keeping track of the good and bad things their reports do
Not
so that they
necessarily.
can
Yeah.
quarterly or yearly or biannually be like, here's the stuff so they can be objective and remember all that stuff.
I think that so what's important is the need that they are able to one, give frequent feedback to the people, and two, indeed, when you have a discussion such as the quarterly performance review, the yearly performance review, that they can point to very specific things. And then, to be honest, I know some people that are doing it like keeping track a lot. I know some people that are not keeping track, but they somehow have it in their mind and they can point to specific things. I think that the thing is, you have this requirement as a manager, and then how you fulfill it is up to you. And you can try to do it without a system. And if it doesn't work, then you know that you need a
Right.
system. Uh,
Yeah, that makes sense. The key point I think that I'm taking from you is that like year end or biannual or even quarterly reviews with concrete specific examples. It's just those are words without value.
yeah, and I think it should be even more frequent than that. Like, I am a really big fan of giving feedback every at least other week because even just because people need it. Like, I always make the example of why are video games so engaging and
Oh
why
yeah,
video games are engaging because you get feedback every 3 seconds.
yeah.
You do something, you get feedback. And I am quite convinced that in some measure, you can make a lot of jobs more interesting by just giving feedback more frequently.
Have you ever heard of like some guy made I think maybe it was Robert Kiyosaki. He made some board game called Cash Flow. Have you ever heard of this?
I know Robert Kiyosaki. I think that he made a board game. I've never seen that.
I
Yeah.
don't know. It'd just be really interesting if one day you rolled out with a video game that like really crystallized this idea of the frequent feedback, scale the corporate hierarchy. I don't know.
No, but I think that you can test it like with some, I don't know, like with some employee of yours. If you make the point of, for example, giving them feedback twice a day for 1 week, of course, maybe you tell them before so that it's not too weird. Like, why is my manager suddenly giving me feedback so much? But just maybe something like, I want you to grow on this one thing and to help you, I will just for 1 week give you feedback twice a day. And if you manage to hit where the spot where you're giving at least enough positive and the negatives, I really think that it's almost automatic that you will engage and develop. And, you know,
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'm just thinking about what that would be like listening to you. For me, it feels like most days it would just be like, I have no idea what you did today. Next day, I don't know what you did today. All right, today, yeah, you sent me what it can depend on the role.
yeah, yeah. It needs to be a role that you have a bit of knowledge of what they're doing or you have some contact with. Yeah.
That, by the way, is not like it's not like a criticism of the idea. I think it's actually maybe that's like
Uh,
really interesting, right? Because if you're telling them almost daily, or obviously by the end of a week or every 2 weeks, I would know what they were doing. But if you're telling them daily, yeah, I have no idea what you're doing today, that would definitely probably change behavior. You wouldn't say that it implies something negative, but if you said it in a respectful, yeah, I didn't get an update from you. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm not saying that's good, but I just don't know. And so that, to your point, this is an interesting experiment.
like, I've seen that like for a lot of things. I'm thinking even just myself, like something that all my life I didn't like doing was dressing, like shopping for clothes. And like,
Yeah.
I really hated it. And I was doing it really on a need basis. And then my wife just gave me feedback. Like I met her and she was telling me that, oh, this looks nice. Oh, this one was, and then suddenly it became interesting. It became
Ah,
engaging. Okay, now I'm still maybe like on average, I'm not like, but I was so much below average. Yeah.
that is really interesting. That really is food for thought. I'm just thinking about ways that I could maybe take some jobs that are feedback lists or even acknowledgement lists. Going back to that guy who said that he just wanted to be acknowledged for how hard the job he was doing. And can you get some feedback or acknowledgement in there? Even if it's as simple as just something, some sort of little video game check. I don't know. It's powerful.
It is.
That's like the real management question for our age, I think. Because like everyone under 40 has probably been raised on a pretty significant amount of video games. And it's like,
Yes.
how do you channel that in a way that works? It really is. I don't know. To me, that seems important.
Yeah.
The question is, though, to me, is if the employee knows it's not their manager, does that feedback still have the same value to them?
I think to some effect, yes. Like my wife has started with absolutely no background in coding, anything like that.
Yeah.
I set up a website for her, and now she starts writing blog posts to promote her business, articles about what she teaches, and so on. And then recently, she installed a plugin that gives you the SEO score for the blog post that you write. Suddenly, she's on an optimization spree. And
Uh,
it's a number that is calculated not even on some very superficial metrics, like are the paragraphs of not too long? Do you mention the keyword enough times? Like this kind of thing. But just that number, I really think that we are wide for feedback.
my next tweet is going to be like, give me an example of how you've gamified in a video game sense some aspect of your business. It'd be interesting to see what people
Yeah.
are doing to do that.
Huh?
One thing about AI that I really want to implement is just I want one of these AI things to just tear through all of our processes and just digest all that text, and then to create like a nice little chat bot when anyone has a question like,
Yeah.
hey, what's the maternity policy, or like, where do I find this document, or how do we handle safety with regards to the
Yeah.
situation. That would be,
Yeah.
I think that already exists, but I need to I gotta
I really think that this is going to come very soon. But I can also see some negative things. Like, I don't know, do you remember Hot or Not, like these kind of things?
yeah.
So imagine like in a dystopian thing, if someone came up with an app where you put your girlfriend's picture and the app tells you like a score. And let's imagine that the app becomes popular enough. That would be terrible. I could see a lot of relationships
Yeah,
problem being created.
people talk about the unrealistic photoshopping on, like,
Yeah,
magazine covers and in advertisements online and the kind of negative effects that had on women.
yeah.
Imagine I could certainly see people, guys too, just changing their diets and their routines just to get that score up. That's totally possible.
No, because now we have the standards, but we don't have the scores. So there is
Yeah,
still this opacity, there is this plausible
right.
deniability and whatnot.
Yeah, likes on social media is, to your point, there's opacity there in terms of what a like
Yeah.
means, right? They is that person liking your post because they're your friend or because they actually like the content? It's hard to know. One other AI thing that's really interesting that I heard about is in the US, the people in their like let's say around 30 are millennials, and then the next generation after that is Gen Z, and they're like late teens, early 20s, whatever. And then the generation after that, it's like my son's generation, he's generation alpha or something like that. So apparently these young kids are, instead of developing friendships, they're like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 year olds. What they're doing is they're just developing friendships with AI. And they, instead of being friends with your neighbor, they can be friends with literally like Lionel Messi. I don't have a study to back it up, but someone
Mm.
said that this is like a real thing and it's a real problem, and I could totally see it being the case.
Yeah,
Like, why would you want to be friends with the and younger generation? Maybe not kids that are that young, but the Gen Z, the guys in there and the guys and girls in their like late teens or whatever. So many of their communications are online, anyways. That you could just not do. Okay, many of them are hanging out in person, of course, but like, why not? If you're like 8 or 9, why not be friends with Lionel Messi instead of the guy who stole your toy, who lives next to you? Wild world.
yeah. I don't know, the kids that I see now, like in the streets, at the park here, they seem like relatively normal. Normal as in behaving exactly as I remember my child to
Mhm.
be outside, but maybe that's just a reverse survivorship bias, and I'm not seeing the ones that are not going to the park.
Yeah. Yeah, that's certainly true. Alright, man.
Thank
Um,
you so much. It was really a pleasure.
yeah, you too, Luca.
Thank you.
Alright, man. See ya.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.